Marriage, is it overrated? I don't know. Is it something people do out of convenience? Is it out of real love? Is it a business transaction, a tax benefit? Well, whatever it is one of the chapters in the book titled Dominion and Power, or The Science of Life and Living, written by Charles Brodie Patterson, which he included in his 7th edition, mentioning that he has enlarged the book to include part 2. So there's a lot of golden nuggets here. If you're new to my channel, welcome. So glad you found me. And if you'd like to catch up on this book, please visit my book playlist where you will find this book and many others. And to you, my subscribing community, welcome back. Hopefully you are enjoying this book. And I am really appreciating your comments. So thank you so much for letting me know you stopped by. Before I move on to the next section, I'd like to give my narrator's recap regarding the previous chapters, which were friendship and equality of the sexes. One of the things that I find interesting is when reading these older books, it really allows us to not only kind of get into the mind of the author, but also the collective mind of the timestamp of the era. This book was published in 1910, and one of the things that I like to do when I read older books is take a minute to absorb the growth of the human race. At the same time, also the progress of the mind and the way that we have been thinking over the years. And so in this book, I had an opportunity to think about that, especially here where this author was talking about the equality of the sexes as in relating it to, the dominion and power, or the science of life and living. And in that sense, there was a section there in the equality of the sexes where he actually mentions an article that Tesla wrote. While Tesla was an amazing mind, it seems that his values about where the place of women should be and where men should be were totally very antiquated. And he was of the opinion, it seems, that women should be home raising children, and that there's a certain softness that would be lost if the women ventured out into the working field. And so here we are, we're in 2024 as the time that I'm reading this book. And where have we come? I will be an example that myself, I have had 2 careers which by all purposes would be considered careers that were male dominant. I was a deputy sheriff for 10 years with Metro-Dade County in Miami, Florida. And also recently I stepped down from being a mayor in our small town in the city of Lake Helen, Florida. So these positions, I could tell you, were back then probably, I can't imagine women, wearing uniforms, pants, and carrying guns, or, sitting making big decisions for their city. And so I do not believe that it has diminished me as a feminine woman, but I do believe that I have added value to the organization that I worked with, to my community, and in general to the world. And as we show up, as long as we show up and bring the best value and try our very best to improve and leave things better, oh my God, I think that it doesn't matter what gender we are. What do you think? Now, sadly that I'm going to share this, there was this male commissioner who wanted to diminish my role as a mayor. That made it a point, if not at least once at every meeting, he would say that the mayor's position was ceremonial. So it was someone that obviously did not like to see me in that position and was very vocal about it, very disrespectful. But you know what? Every time, that he did that, he just showed himself to the community. And I did not admonish it because, I do believe in freedom of speech. And I always say, if you give someone a shovel long enough, they will bury themselves. And so having said that, I'm not going to linger on this no more, but I would love to hear your opinion. I mean, how do you feel of, Do you think that we've gone long enough to see any deterioration in the fact that women have joined the workforce? And by deterioration, I'm saying, is this something that's affecting, the decision to raise children, or how children are raised? Or is this something that's causing men to feel emasculated? And if so, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. All right, I want to say let's move on to this next chapter, because I'm really looking forward to seeing where the author is going to put this in the place of life and living. So sit back as I turn the page. A quote by Browning: "Marriage making for the earth, with gold so much, birth, power, repute so much, or beauty, youth so much, in lack of these, be as the angels rather, who apart know themselves into one, are found at length married, but marry never, no, nor give in marriage. They are man and wife at once, when the true time is. Here we have to wait not so long neither. Could we by a wish have what we will, and get the future now? Would we wish aught done undone in the past? So let him wait God's instant men call years. Meantime, hold hard by truth and his great soul. Do out the duty. Through such souls alone, God stooping shows sufficient of his light for us in the dark to rise by, and I rise." End of quote. A quote by W.M.D. Whitehide: "Just as true marriage is the highest blessedness that can come to man or woman, so a false marriage, a marriage conceived in vanity or avarice or sensuality, is the most fearful calamity. The binding of two loveless, selfish hearts together can only result in mutual misery. The resulting state is not simply hell, as it is frequently called. It is that more painful, but at the same time a more hopeful condition, which in figurative language we may describe as the compelling of persons who are fit only for hell to dwell perpetually in heaven. It is a condition which calls for the expression of the most tender and unselfish love at every point of constant contact, imposed upon persons who have no love to give. The supreme blessedness of the ideal marriage measures by contrast the superlative wretchedness of a loveless union. The modern man brings to his wife a wide range of business sagacity, political influence, scientific and speculative interests. The modern woman brings to her husband rich acquisitions in literary and aesthetic taste, social life, and philanthropic and religious fervor. Each life is reinforced and multiplied by all that is in the other, and thus both enter through the portals of the family into the life of the universal spirit, of which at best only vague and shadowy glimpses come to them in the blindness of their individualistic isolation." End quote. A quote by Mark, chapter 10, verse 6, 7, and 8. "But from the beginning of the creation God made them male and female. For this reason shall a man leave his father and mother, and cleave to his wife. And they twain shall be one flesh. So then they are no more twain, but one flesh." End quote. For this reason will a man leave his father and mother, and cleave to his wife. The mystery of marriage is in the twain becoming one. If we go back to the allegorical story of creation, we find there this statement: "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. The remarkable part of this statement is the introduction of unity and duality, both in reference to God and man. The Hebrews believed in God as being one. The world has never had a purer monotheism than that held to by this people. And yet, in this first chapter of their sacred books is found a declaration of unity, duality, and Trinity. To satisfy the mind of the biblical student, let us make a careful examination and see whether the foregoing statement is borne out by the actual facts in the case, taking the thought of unity first. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. The thought of duality is as directly brought out in, let us make man in our own image. Those who declare for the fatherhood of God should not fail to perceive that the motherhood is just as clearly set forth. The Trinity is affirmed in the statement of the Father-Mother, God creating man in his own image and likeness. The Father-Mother begetting the child, which is the third principle of the Godhead. That which is true of God is also true of man, and must of necessity be so in order that man should show forth the perfect image and likeness of God. Careful reading will make it plain that God is a unit as regards animating life and controlling intelligence. But the full image and likeness of God is in Father, Mother, Child. It is one life in all and through all and above all, and one intelligence controlling and directing all. Oneness in spirit and diversity in form. We must always remember when we think of man, that image and likeness of God is spirit, not body. That the body at best can only be an outer symbol of the inner man. Again, I wish to impress you with the fact that in this spiritual creation of man, which is really the foreshadowing of the physical creation, there is no separation between the male and the female. This is the spiritual creation, God's ideal of himself, involved in the soul of man, the child of God. When we come to the allegorical second chapter of Genesis, we find another statement of man's creation. Here we have the physical creation, and at this point we have the differentiation of the male and the female. It is as though the soul had become divided, each part having a separate life or existing of its own. In this division, the question naturally arises, did each retain the full image of God, or did the physical condition point also to a division of soul or mind? Emanuel Swedenborg, in many of his writings, tells of love as being the feminine principle and wisdom the masculine. Now, in all true marriages, it is the love in the woman and the wisdom in the man that forms the magnet to attract and hold them together. Love and wisdom begets the at-one-ment between soul and mind. When we see man and woman drawn together in this way, it seems to be the divine plan. Although in times past it has been thought by some very wise men that each sex had the possibilities of both potentially, and that in the process of development each soul would unfold to the fullness of the Godhead, or disclose the perfect image and likeness which was involved in the beginning, that man and woman were not in reality complementary one to the other. Balzac, in his wonderful, beautiful story of Seraphita, brings out the thought of a man and woman of a very high spiritual development begetting a child, the parents passing away on the 9th anniversary of the child's birth. The great central idea is that the souls of the father and mother unite in the life of the child. And when the child has grown to maturity, men fall in love with the feminine nature and women fall in love with the masculine nature. But the united soul has need of neither. The idea, as thus set forth, is worthy of serious consideration. In fact, the union or marriage of soul with soul is one that should command far greater attention than it does command at the present time. Marriage, without doubt, is the greatest event in this earthly life of man or woman. It is a sacrament fraught with happiness, with all that is highest and noblest in life. Or it is a base counterfeit wherein sorrow and degradation usurp the place of the highest and holiest thoughts and emotions of mind and soul. 1,000 other questions of far less importance occupy the minds of the people, but this question, which is of the most vital importance to man's well-being, is kept in the background. Children are brought up so woefully ignorant that they have no conception of what awaits them in the married life. The whole subject of the relation between man and woman is tabooed. It is as though people were ashamed to think or give expression in words to things which, although sacred, nevertheless should be thoroughly understood. Some people go on the principle that the young will find out soon enough, but it is surely a mistaken policy on the part of parents to keep their children in ignorance of the many problems that await them in the wedded life. Some little light, some little knowledge might avert many tragedies that so often arise in the married life. Is experience the only teacher, or can we profit by the mistakes of others? In this question, as in every other, we must take into consideration the three planes of development, and that marriage differs, in a sense, on each plane. On the physical plane, there is little besides the desire for reproduction and the purely sensuous desires, and if nature's laws are observed, comparative peace and happiness are the result. The requirements of the physical plane are so limited that there is less liability to mental friction and discord than on the intellectual plane, where there is greater diversity of thought. Two souls uniting on this higher plane, having the same desires and aspirations, should blend harmoniously together. But too often, the aspirations and desires are so wide apart that there is no oneness of thought or purpose, and there is failure to understand each other. We find on this plane far more unhappy marriages than on the physical and spiritual planes. One reason being that on the physical there is a purely physical basis for marriage, and on the spiritual plane there is a purely spiritual basis, while on the intellectual plane 100 things may act as controlling influences to marriage. Man here is torn by many and conflicting desires: social ambition, ambition influenced by wealth, intellectual greatness, distinction in any part in life, and other considerations without number. It makes little difference how much two people may desire to do right. If they are not at one in heart and mind, they cannot enter into sympathetic relations. They cannot become mutually helpful. Failure to understand each other begets a discordant mental state, which, instead of being lessened, is increased as time goes on. All spiritual marriage has God as its foundation, that is, has love as its basis. Here, as on the physical plane, there's only one basis for marriage. The marriages on the two planes below are the unions for time. Spiritual marriages are the marriages for eternity. For two souls uniting and blending as one through the power of love, there can be no separation, either in time or eternity. Whom God hath joined together, no man can put asunder. They were created one in the beginning. There is no chance or haphazard in God's plan. There is a spiritual affinity between the soul of a man and the soul of a woman. Only one thing will disclose this affinity: the power of pure and unselfish love in the souls of both. No animal desire, no earthly consideration. Love and love alone. Love that thinketh no evil, love that suffereth long and is kind, love that flows from the soul of the universe into the soul of man. This is the undying factor in all real marriage. Man may not annul this or set it aside, and all that man can do through rite or ceremonial shall not add to it. Some have come falsely to believe that the ceremonial constitutes the marriage, and the Church has rather seemed to foster this idea than to make plain that marriage, in its truest sense, hath to do with heart and mind more than anything or everything else. The question may arise in many minds as to whether union on the first two planes constitutes real marriage. Under certain circumstances and with certain limitations, the answer would be in the affirmative. The circumstance which would tend to real marriage would be the harmonious conditions, the ability resulting from the union to understand each other, the desires and aspirations in common whereby they could enter into each other's lives. The limitation would come from failure to discern the higher law, from the lack of spiritual development, and from placing hopes and desires in externals, so that there would be little influx from the love nature which tends to unify and free the lives of both from worldly selfishness. Such marriage, however, may find perfect fulfillment and continuation in time and eternity. Sorrow and unhappiness might be avoided to a marked degree in the marriage relation upon the lower planes of development if harmony were made one of the chief considerations of the union, and selfish considerations, insofar as it were possible, kept in the background. Two people thoroughly harmonious before marriage would be quite likely to remain so after, but there is little prospect, where lack of harmony exists before the union, that it should develop afterward. No one should be deceived by the thought that things are going to adjust themselves after marriage when they do not adjust during courtship. There is a glamour about courtship which too often hides defects and inconsistencies that only become really known after marriage. There is some little excuse for this mental condition, but there is no excuse for two people who cannot agree and who are jealous or fault-finding with each other during courtship, yet who nevertheless enter into the marriage relation. Occasionally we find women who think that it is their duty to marry a man in order to reform him. To such I would say, reform him first and marry him afterward. This is your only hope, for in taking away the incentive of marriage, you only make it the more difficult for him to change his established habits in life. Parents make very grievous mistakes when they are thoughtful regarding worldly advantages and thoughtless about the advantages which would make their children really happy. Their own experience should show them the better way. No real marriage can have for its foundation lust, the desire for social position, money, or any worldly acquisition. God never sanctions such marriages, neither has he delegated his authority to man to make such unions sacred. Marriage is sacred only when it is whole, complete. Man's law may sanction and uphold, but sorrow, shame, and degradation must be at the end of all such unholy marriages. Throughout the universe, harmony is the keynote of obedience to law, and where there is no harmony, there can be no conformity to law. Many people who believe themselves to be in accord with the law of God would continue to perpetuate these unholy alliances by saying, "Whom God hath joined together, let no man put asunder." Contending for the sacredness of the marriage rite, they violate such sacredness by prolonging a condition which is absolutely attainable and contrary to the law of the universe. All other mistakes in life we are told to correct, to substitute a true condition for a false one, but no matter how great the mistake two persons make in marrying, such a mistake, the divinely appointed say, must not and shall not be corrected. Thus do men set at naught the laws of God, making of marriage a mockery, a delusion, and a snare. There are degrees of love on every plane, because God is made manifest on every plane. Then let love and harmony, as understood on the varying planes of existence, be the God-uniting power that shall link man and woman in the oneness of life. Such unions will result in happy homes, and children, seeing and feeling the harmony and love of father and mother, will greatly profit by their example. The world today is demanding the solution of this mystery. It cannot be set aside, no matter how much the ultra-conservative religionist may desire it. Their efforts to set aside will only cause the pendulum to swing far in the other direction, where extreme radicalism may result in licentious or conditions more unrighteous and contrary to law and order than the unholy marriages of the present. No problem ever presents itself to man without a way of solving it. The solution of this one, however, will be found not in the do-nothing attitude or in saying let well enough alone, but through a strong desire to know God's law in relation to it, and through knowing how to bring the life into conformity with it. Let us study God's revealed will, because this will is revealed to a far greater extent, even at the present, than most people think or care to know. When we realize the truth about the real meaning of marriage and all that it stands for, its sacred import, and the joy and peace it brings when consummated in accord with divine law, the question will no longer be asked, is marriage a failure? Because marriage will be known as it truly is, the crowning act of life, wherein two souls unite and become one, wherein love and wisdom join hands, the atonement, wherein the soul becomes one with the universal soul. End of chapter. Stay here, hit that like button. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next chapter right here on this video. Sit back as I flip the page. Part 2 of Charles Brodie Patterson's Dominion and Power, or The Science of Life and Living. Next chapter titled The Rights of Children. A quote by James Russell Lowell. It is no little thing when a fresh soul and a fresh heart, with their unmeasured scope for good, not gravitating earthward yet, but circling in diviner periods, are sent into the world. Children are God's apostles day by day, sent forth to preach of love and hope and peace. End quote. A quote by Swinburne. All heaven, in every baby born, all absolute of earthly leaven, reveals itself, though man may scorn all heaven. Yet man might feel all sin forgiven, all grief appeased, all pain outworn, by this one revelation given. Soul, now forget thy burden borne. Heart, be thy joys now 7 times 7. Love shows in light more bright than morn, all heaven. End quote. A quote by W.M. DeWitt Hyde. Give him liberty and keep his confidence. Let him choose his course, but be so good and close a friend that he will not think of making an important choice without asking your advice. Spend much time with him, talk much with him, but talk about his little interests, not your grand ideas. Never evade an honest question or put off a legitimate curiosity. Make sure that his first intimation of the significance of sex are suffused with an atmosphere of reverence for its sacredness. Never weary of the interminable prattle about his exploits in play, the characteristics of playmates, the hardship of school, the mechanism of locomotives, the aspiration to become an engineer, a stage driver, or a soldier. Undoubtedly, this union of perfect liberty with perfect confidence is rather an expensive process in the time, patience, and sympathy of the parents, but the reward is great and to be had with a certainty on no cheaper terms. It is the one way to ensure in the child a character which is at the same time strong and good. End of quote. Many volumes have been written concerning the duties of children to their parents, but very little has been said of the duties of parents to their children. A careful and thoughtful analysis of the whole question would show that parents are debtors to their children for more than has generally been supposed. Let parents once realize how much more there is in life because of their children, how child life tends to call out the better side of their natures, how much happiness comes to them through their children, and how much the example of a child's life means, and they will know for a very truth that the trouble of rearing children is more than offset by the blessings which they bring. The truthfulness and faith of the child nature, the optimism which enjoys the present, forgetful of the past, careless of the future, is a necessary example for parents who have lost sight of some of the vital conditions of well-being. Truly, the kingdom of God lies all about within and without the life of a child. A valuable lesson may be learned in the natural way in which children think and act, as well as in their true democracy where race, creed, color, or previous conditions play no part. Whether the lesson be heeded or not, the influence of children for good is of untold value. Prenatal conditions must be taken into consideration when we approach the subject of the rights of children. A thoroughly harmonious marriage in which there is freedom of thought and action on the part of both father and mother is the first requisite for the true recognition of child's rights and the only firm foundation on which to establish the rights of children. The ancient Greeks, understanding the value of prenatal influence far more than the people of the present, surrounded their wives with the most harmonious and beautiful conditions. Many lessons might be learned from their customs tending to raise the standard of moral and physical well-being. Marriage and the bringing of a child into the world are the two most sacred mysteries of life, and are fraught with greater importance than all other events, and if thought and care are necessary in any phase of life, surely they are demanded here. Parents need not expect harmonious children if they are inharmonious themselves. Neither need they expect strong, healthy children if their minds are discordant, because their mental discord acting upon the life of the child will produce mental and physical disturbances. Up to a certain stage in the development of the child, the minds of the parents act upon him in such a way that he reflects their varying thoughts and emotions, and is in no way responsible in his own little life for any mental discord or physical disturbances. As yet, most parents do not realize the truth of this, but when they do, they will understand that they are responsible to the very fullest degree for their children's health. There is a new life coming for mankind, one wherein the vital questions will be thought out and worked out as they never have been before. One wherein a knowledge of the inner life and its laws will give to us the key to the gate which leads to health and happiness. The old order of things is passing away, and a new order has come, or is near at hand, wherein man will realize that he has dominion and power, not alone in the external world, but dominion and power over his own thoughts, his own actions, and the power to control and direct the full force of his own life. A shock may come to those who are dwelling continually on the wisdom and justice of God's plan when they think of little children having to suffer for the wrongdoing of their parents. They may question such wisdom and such justice, but after all, this condition only goes to prove that humanity is one, that we are parts one of another, that if one part suffers, all suffer to some degree. It goes still further to show that if humanity is one body, happiness, health, and strength are not only for every part, but for the whole. That there is no real salvation for the whole if any part of the whole is accepted. The law that saves the part is the law that saves the whole. There is one thing that parents cannot be too careful concerning, and that is filling the receptive mind of a child with false or unreal ideas of life. There are so many ways of doing this that one needs to be on his guard pretty much all the time when in the presence of children. As an illustration, almost anyone can go back in mind to the time of his childhood and remember some disagreeable story or tale told by someone that filled the little mind with fear and made it unhappy for weeks afterward. The habit that some parents have formed of talking about sickness, disease, and pain when children are listening is harmful in the extreme, as it fills their little minds with morbid, unreal thoughts. If a child has a vivid imagination, he may often become really sick because of such conversation on the part of his parents. Let me impress on the minds of parents and all the necessity of always being as bright and as happy as circumstances will admit, and also to keep the conversations thoroughly wholesome and uplifting. If the state of fear is once established in the mind of a child, That in turn begets cowardice and lack of self-reliance, and to a degree may affect all of his afterlife. While the boy or girl who is taught the real truth concerning life grows in knowledge and becomes self-reliant and courageous. In the care and bringing up of children, in the present, the greater responsibility rests with the mother. But there is neither right nor justice in this. If perfect equality existed between husband and wife, the responsibility would be shared equally. As it is, the greater burden of the care of children is placed on the mother, while the advantages necessary to the intelligent bringing up of children are denied her. The superficial mind may say that it rests with the mother to rear the child, and with the father to provide for the material wants, and when they do this, that they are fulfilling the natural requirements of life. But if the mother is going to rear the child in the way he should go, then the more highly she is developed spiritually, intellectually, and physically, the more efficient she becomes in the care of both the minds and bodies of her children. It is not enough that the father should provide for the physical sustenance of the child. Some fathers excuse themselves by saying that having worked hard all day, when evening comes, they need rest. Max Aurel once related the following incident. Some years ago, I was spending Sunday afternoon in the house of a young married man in Chicago, who, I was told, possessed 20 millions. The poor fellow. It was the 20 millions which possessed him. He had a most beautiful and interesting wife, and the loveliest little girl of 3 or 4 years of age that I ever set my eyes on. That lovely little girl was kind enough to take me at once. There's no accounting for taste. We had a little flirtation in the distance at first. By and by she came toward me, nearer and nearer. Then she stopped in front of me and looked at me. Hesitating with her finger in her pretty little mouth, I knew what she wanted, and I said to her, "That's all right, come on." She jumped on my knees, settled herself comfortably, and asked me to tell her stories. I started at once. Now, you understand, I was not allowed to stop, but I took breath and I said to her, "Does not your papa tell you long stories on Sundays?" That lovely little round face grew sad and quite long. "Oh no," she said, "Papa is too tired on Sundays." If parents only knew it, they could get far greater rest and more valuable knowledge from entering into child life than in almost any other way. It is not sitting or lying down that rests one, but the power to change thought from one thing to something entirely different, and entering into the child life would give both rest and recreation. It would tend to renew youth, and in every way prove beneficial to father and child. It would be of untold assistance to the mother who has been engaged throughout the day with the care of the children. It would introduce a new element into the life of the child, and children require change of thought quite as much as do older people. The monotony experienced by older people is also experienced by children. A few words on the question of the temperament of parents will be timely. It may be said that temperament is a matter of heredity, but being born into this world with a certain temperament, the power is given to change it. A morbid, gloomy temperament may be made bright and hopeful, and the anxious, worrying temperament may become the peaceful, restful one. No matter what mental condition is brought into the world, it can be changed, modified, or eradicated. Children will thrive best where there is a spirit of hopefulness, where the mental sunshine of fearlessness, brightness, and gladness is diffused about them. Parents should always be patient with children, remembering that the understanding of a child is only developed to a limited degree, and through their being patient and showing the right course of thought and action, more can be accomplished than by manifesting a spirit of impatience. Sometimes young dogs and kittens will play with a ball for hours at a time, but with children it is very different. Frequent change is necessary to their well-being. The mind of the child already gives evidence that it is not going to be satisfied with any one phase of life, but must know all there is to be known before it will ever rest content. The mind of the child is really the prophecy of all that is yet to come. Parents should never try to quell anything in the nature of normal activity in the mind of the child. It is only when the child thinks and acts far beyond his years that they should be careful not to in any way increase such activity of mind, because in such cases the head may become abnormally developed to the detriment of the rest of the physical organism. Children should never be told that there are two ways of doing things. The right way only should be pointed out. Try to teach the child that there's only one way in life and one way to do everything, and it will make the child's mind more harmonious and the life much easier to live than by having a right way and a wrong way. Parents owe it to their children never to do anything that will cause them to be fearful, never to threaten them with punishment for wrongdoing, but insofar as it is possible, keep their little minds filled with courage, brightness, kindness, gentleness, straightforwardness, politeness, and truthfulness. Parents should always think of their children as they would have them be and do. By keeping this uppermost in their minds, they will find that the life of the child will shape itself according to their highest ideal. What they think and see in their own minds concerning their children, if held to be in a strong, steadfast way, will sooner or later be beautifully expressed in the life of the child. Punishment meted out to children for their wrongdoing is seldom or never merited, if punishment ever can be said to be merited. The child is acting out more the life of those about him than his own. The worry, the anger, or the fretfulness is occasioned more by conditions thrown about the child than by anything wrought out by the child. If the punishment were meted out according to the true deserts, more often could it go to the parents. Punishment does not make children better, but serves to call out a certain sense of resentment, and when parents punish their children, they themselves become instrumental in the introduction of a false element in the life of the child. Parents should teach their children how to think and reason for themselves. When a child is told to do a thing and asks the father or mother the reason for it, the reason should never be denied. It is not sufficient to say, "I told you to." Such an example, if carried out, will be copied by the child, and in afterlife will show forth as a disagreeable trait of character. The child has a right to the reason for anything he is asked to do or refrain from. Parents should be reasonable and consistent in their dealings with their children. Children should not be allowed to do a thing today and have the same thing refused them on the morrow with neither rhyme nor reason. In fact, it is better to deal with children in as reasonable and as straightforward a way as one would with adults. Make everything very simple and very clear. Truthfulness, simplicity, and directness, once established in the mind of a child, are going to be of untold benefit to him in his afterlife. The impressions received in early childhood are the abiding ones. The frank, straightforward, manly man is usually so because of his early training. Do everything possible to direct the mind of the child into true channels. The child who is brought into the environment of parents who are fault-finding, intolerant, and selfish, who punish the child for misdemeanors which are often the direct result of their own thought and action, not only has a hard time in childhood, but will find it difficult in afterlife to overcome the wrong tendencies which were implanted in childhood. It is neither right nor just for parents to expect their children to express more than they themselves are expressing. The mental atmosphere surrounding the child will have a marked effect upon the harmony of the child's mind and the well-being of his body. Respect the rights of children, and when grown up, they will respect the rights of others. Children are influenced, to a marked degree, by the example presented to them by their elders. Give them the very best of examples. Make it easy for them to be obedient and truthful. Make it easy for them to be loving and kind by being all these yourself. What you are in a thoroughly consistent way, that also they will become. End of chapter. All right, let's move on to the next video where we will continue with this book, Dominion and Power. or The Science of Life and Living by Charles Brody Patterson. Before we head out, please do take a second here and hit that like button. If you like what you see or what you hear, please do subscribe. And if it's something that you think someone you know could benefit from, please share it with your friends or family. Okay, meet you at the next video.